Hey everybody, welcome back to another reasonable price prediction, the series where we try to figure out where your favorite altcoins could be headed. Now today we're back with Cardano, and of course we're just going to have a quick checkup, see where the price has gone, see where the price could be headed based on several different factors. And I'm going to ultimately leave you to make your own decision on where you think the price could go. I am going to talk about my theory, and I know that sounds pretentious saying my theory, but I haven't actually really seen it spoken about anywhere else. And maybe that's just the fact that I haven't been surrounding myself in a lot of crypto content recently, these last few months. Either way, it's what I think is going to happen. It doesn't matter who came up with the idea. Do I think it's right or not? At the end of the day, social points don't really matter too much to me. And what I think is happening is that we are currently in a right translated cycle. And while you might get confused with the left translated cycle, which is quite a popular theory right now, they are different. Where the left translated cycle suggests that in the 4-year cycle, we're getting our bull run, which usually happens towards the beginning of the cycle or towards the end of the previous cycle. Like, for example, here, last cycle in 2020, our bull run started at the end of the last cycle. The left translated cycle theory suggests that we're getting things much earlier. So instead of it being on right at the cusp of the halving, it was actually quite a while before the halving. A good 6 months or so. And while this is a valid theory, and a lot of much smarter people than myself are fully convinced this is what's happening, I would politely disagree and say that I think we are currently in a right translated theory. And that means that everything that's happening now is actually happening much later on in the cycle. And I think that, this cycle particularly, we've had an extremely long, harsh bear market, and keyword being long there. And I think that's just forced everything slightly out of sync. And usually what we get in a cycle is we have our major bull run, which is where we put in the crazy gains and where the Fed is printing money, basis points are low, unemployment is low, all these good things. Lots of people are making lots of money. And then we have our smaller bull run, which is kind of just more of a recovery rally than anything in my opinion. But it's oftentimes when things aren't as great, the macro environment isn't as good, and we just get a little move to the upside. We've seen Bitcoin go through multiple of these over the years that it's been around, and all the other altcoins with it, and it seems to be a pattern. And while the asset is quite young, it does seem to be, like I said, a pattern, a trend that does often happen. And here we can see this cycle, we never really got a minor bull run, if you will, until recently. I would say this is our minor bull run. And if we kind of inspect what's actually happened, we can see that we've moved from this low. Cardano kept putting in this low at 25 cents, kept revisiting, and eventually bounced. We had this first kind of great rally that the crypto space had seen in 3 years, basically. And Cardano moved all the way up to 70 cents and then finally up to 82 cents in the space of about 6 months. And since March, which is when we put in this high, we had a sharp downturn and we've been trading sideways basically since the halving, through the halving, I would argue. And this is pretty common in most of the crypto space. A lot of charts do look like this in the crypto space from the last year or so. And now if we zoom out and take a look at what happened last halving, so again at the same time period in the 4-year cycle relative to each other, so the start or the end of the cycle, we can see that while we did have a sell-off before the halving, it wasn't to the degree of this sell-off. And also we had a crazy rally right after the sell-off before the halving, and we kept rallying through the halving, completely through the halving. And we can see if we zoom back in, we haven't been rallying through the halving. Now we rallied well before the halving, so you could argue that this is our first kind of rally that we spoke about here. And then we get this pullback, and that's what we're currently seeing. And this consolidation that we're currently in is the same thing. However, I would disagree. And one of the reasons was here, we were trending up. We were putting in higher lows. However, if we take a look over here, we're kind of trending down. If you look at kind of the moves that we're making now, we're currently up the last 3 weeks, but that can change very quickly, and it looks like we could very easily move down back to this trend. It ultimately doesn't matter. It's too soon to really say, but I would also argue that the moves just aren't similar in terms of percentages. Like here, when Cardano moved up probably about 500% if you count this low. If we take a look at what it did over here, a much less meaningful move, basically under half of what it did from low to high. Now the time frames aren't too dissimilar. If we take a look at how long we spent until we'll say we reached this high, 21 weeks. Again, if we take a look at where we moved from To our high, it was 26 weeks. So again, not a huge discrepancy there, but in my opinion, not as cushy numbers as I'd want it to be certain or be comfortable saying that. So for me, while I think it's definitely a valid theory, I don't think it's what's currently happening. But if we take a look at what happened for our last minor bull run, if we measure from low to high, we can see that we're at a much similar move. We're at 290%, whereas here we were 225. So again, we're closer. How long did it take us to move from this low to this high? 29 weeks. We were 26 here. So again, the numbers more similar. Also, we're in a much similar macro environment. Here, basis points were low. Fed was printing money. Everything was great in the economy. Even though, tens of thousands of people were dying probably every week or whatever, I don't know that stat, and there was a scary disease everywhere, and trade supplies were drying up, and all these terrible things, crypto went on the best bull run ever. So it kind of shows that, and it wasn't just crypto, sorry, it was also the stock market. So it kind of shows that crypto doesn't care about what's happening in the world, it only cares about what's happening in the financial space. And in the financial space, things were great because everybody basically had unlimited supply to money. So stuff went up. Here, there was no such thing. And currently where we are now, there was no such thing. So again, lots of similarities. And also, again, like we were talking about timeframes, I don't know why I measured them when I'd obviously drawn them out here. We have 26 weeks at the bottom from this low to the high, 29 from this low to the high. We then went down for 25 weeks, which over here, if that happens to a similar degree, again, 25 weeks, puts us in September, end of Q3. And then if we're counting our low as the COVID low, that was an additional 13 weeks after that, it basically puts us at the end of the year, December time of 2024, which would kind of line up with when a lot of people were initially predicting the bull run to take place before this move. And again, just these circles, kind of this circle here on the end of the 25 weeks, this blue one in between, and this purple one at the end of the 13 additional. We could be seeing something like that play out again. Who really knows? I certainly don't. But then also, if you want to kind of consider the bull run that we had afterwards, if we have a similar duration one, from this low to the high, we were gone for 75 weeks of just green, basically, which is a long time to have a bull run, a very long time. And now I'm not suggesting that we get something like that again, but if you want to assume best case scenario, we have 75 weeks of great price action and we sort of stay within this trend that Cardano has put in from bull run to bull run, we can see that after those 75 weeks, Cardano, if it hits it exactly on 75 weeks, would reach about $8. Now, do I think Cardano will go to $8? I don't know. I will have sold all of mine at that point, I'll tell you that much. I would probably put $8 as the upper limit as well. I mean, we see that the longer the altcoins go on for, the less likely they are to kind of keep putting in these really strong moves to the upside. We've seen it with Litecoin, we've seen it with Monero, we've seen it with things like Ethereum, all these great alts, and while Ethereum will probably go on to put in higher highs, higher all-time highs this coming bull run, Cardano can still do that, but maybe not by a huge degree. For reference, last bull run, it was about $3 was its all-time high. So again, you're looking at about a 2.5x on top of the all-time high from the previous cycle, which could be a big ask. It depends, because crypto would kind of do these moves no problem, especially in this type of a bull run where, Cardano went up, 12,000% in the bull run. So a move up, again, assuming we go back to this low of 3,000%, seems like a lot less, but realistically it's still a huge amount of money that is being put into Cardano. So again, it's up to you. You have to decide these things by using your own rationale along with other things like how much faith you have in the project, and not just because you've heard good things saying about it, but because you've actually checked the stats, you've checked the daily volume, you've checked the active address wallets, you've checked how many transactions are above $10 and things like this, you know what I mean? Important things. Where is a lot of Cardano being held? Is it majority done by whales? Is there a lot of it on exchanges at the moment? There's a lot of stuff that you have to look at, and that's not even like factoring the team behind it, although a lot of people would kind of consider them OGs and trust them. Whole different video, but again, that's where I think Cardano would be kind of headed on the US dollar pair. Taking a look at it on Bitcoin, we can see that this does also quite a bit emphasize the right translated cycle, the theory that I've been kind of pushing on this channel. And that is that we are basically, getting this last cycle, what we got in 2019, we are now getting in 2014. So instead of it being 4 years later, we're getting it 5 years later. We're getting things much later on. I do think we'll probably return to these lows, most likely, of sort of 450 sats, where Cardano went last cycle. It even wicked much lower to below 400. I would not guarantee that, but I would kind of assume that we will keep going down. And this is not just Cardano specific. I don't want people to think I'm hating on Cardano. I think it's a good project, but I think it just has more money to lose against Bitcoin. I like the project, but I can still be realistic about it. And again, if we compare these moves, they are extremely similar. We kind of put in a low, or we put in a low here, whichever one you want to consider. We get a small move up, a small move up. We get a second stronger move up. We get a second stronger move up. We put in a high, and then we have a strong move back down where we come back down to these lows. Strong move back down where we come, fair enough, not down to these lows, but we come close to them. And then we just break down, basically, and collapse. And we occasionally get a week of green. Occasionally, but very rarely. Cardano hasn't had a week of green for a very long time, except for here. Currently, this is a week of green, but as of recording, it's also Monday, so kind of means nothing. And I do think that we will keep trending down. Again, if we kind of follow this trend line down and see where kind of it could put us, we could be looking like we'll be bottoming out in September, August time, Q3, which would make a lot of sense because once we bottom out, we don't just go straight back up. Not always on the Bitcoin pair. We often trade sideways. Now we might spend less time down here so that the crypto space can kind of squeeze back into that 4-year cycle. But honestly, I think this might be kind of a move that forever moves the crypto space out of sync from what it previously was. So even if we do spend like 2 months or 3 months less down at these lows, we're still behind by, close to a year, basically. So I think this will be something that kind of changes the crypto space from how it's usually done stuff. And this doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing. It just means that a lot of other people who are going to be assuming that things are playing out similarly, or just new money that don't know anything about the crypto space at all, and just want to put their funds somewhere, might be caught out. And that might cause panic selling, that might cause other things that could further disrupt the cycles, trends that we've seen throughout history. It's all up in the air. Anyway, where I think Cardano's headed, like I said, I think we're going down to this 450 sat level. I would be kind of comfortable saying that. I would say 500 is definitely on the cards. I wouldn't write it off anyway. I mean, we could just go up from here. Like if we take a look at before, we had this 80% move down. If we take a look at where bringing this down to the line would be, it would only be minus 71. So again, while they're similar moves, they're not the same. So you could argue that it could go even lower technically, and then we could go down to, 350 sats. There's a lot of ways you want to look at this. And to be honest with you, I'm taking quite a bullish standpoint measuring where we are currently with 75, moving down to the lows of 71. I think that's reasonable. And if we actually bring this up to this level, sort of compare the closes, they're actually not too dissimilar. There's about 5% in it. Again, we also had similar moves to the upside at the beginning, about 100% here and about 90% here. And the durations are kind of similar as well, where we get these strong moves up and these quick, sharp moves down. This cycle is definitely happening slower, but everything this cycle has happened slower. So it's just one of those things where we have to be, we're in uncharted territory. Like this happened over 18 weeks, when we moved from this high down to this low, our first kind of wick below the 400 sat level, 450 sat level. We've now gone further than 18 weeks, and we're nowhere close to the 450 sat level. So you could argue that this is the bottom. This could be where we find support. There is definitely a valid excuse to be made for that. If you're going off time frames, I'm not ruling out either, to be honest with you. Again, it's up for you to make that decision. I'm happy with my portfolio as it is. I'm just holding long term, but I'm kind of putting these videos out there for people who would want to try and time the market more, or trade more maybe. Either way, I think the video's gone on for long enough. If you liked the video, please leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike too, that's totally fine. Please consider subscribing, as it really, really, really helps out the channel. And of course, if you like the videos, you're going to see more content if you're subscribed. If you don't like the videos, that's totally fine too. Thanks so much for watching. Take care and peace.